There is a child crying in the dark. The sound begins as a wail, raw and urgent, the kind that tears through silence and demands the world to stop. It rises and falls in waves, each sob a signal flare shot into the emptiness, each breath a prayer that someone will hear. The door remains closed. No footsteps echo down the hallway. No light spills beneath the frame. The child cries louder, as if volume alone could summon comfort, as if desperation could be currency enough to purchase presence. But the night does not answer. The house settles into its own quiet breathing. The refrigerator hums in a distant room. Moonlight filters through curtains and pools on the floor, indifferent and pale. And gradually, something inside the child begins to understand. Not with words, because words have not yet formed for this kind of knowing, but with the body, with the nervous system, with the ancient animal brain that recognizes abandonment before consciousness can name it. The crying softens. The wails become whimpers. The whimpers become silence. And the silence is not peace, it is surrender. It is the moment when a small heart learns its first terrible lesson about the world, that pain is a private country, that suffering is meant to be endured alone, that the hand reaching out into darkness will close around nothing but air. This is where it begins, not with cruelty, not with violence, but with absence, with the empty space where comfort should have lived, with the echo of a need that went unanswered so many times that eventually the need learned to go silent too. You carry that child with you still. You are sitting in a different room now, years or decades removed from that dark bedroom, but the lesson remains carved into your nervous system like a scar in living tissue. When sadness arrives, your first instinct is not to reach for the phone, not to walk into the next room where someone who loves you is waiting. Your first instinct is to lock the door, to turn off the lights, to pull the blanket over your head and disappear into a space where no one can see you break. You are not afraid of the sadness itself. You are afraid of being seen while you are sad. When someone tries to comfort you, when they place a hand on your shoulder or offer words meant to soothe your body, does not soften into their touch. It goes rigid. Every muscle tightens as if preparing for impact. You smile and say you are fine, and you gently, firmly push their hand away. Not because you do not need comfort, but because receiving it feels more dangerous than bearing the pain alone. This is the inheritance of the uncomforted child. A fortress built from necessity, a self-reliance, forged in the fires of neglect, and a heart that learned to be its own cold comfort in a world that offered none. The world looks at you and sees strength. They see someone who never asks for help, who handles crisis with eerie calm, who seems to need nothing from anyone. They call you independent, self-sufficient, maybe even cold. They admire what they think is your armor, never understanding that armor, when worn long enough, fuses to skin. They do not see the child still sitting in that dark room, knees pulled to chest, learning over and over again that reaching out only amplifies the ache of being left empty-handed. You have learned to wear this misunderstanding like a second skin. Sometimes you even believe it yourself. You tell yourself you prefer solitude, that you function better alone, that other people's emotions are exhausting, and their attempts at comfort feel intrusive and awkward. You have built an entire identity around not needing what you were never given. And there is truth in this, the way there is truth in saying, a tree grows around the fence that has cut into its trunk. The growth is real, but so is the wound. The confusion runs deeper still because you are not actually cold. Your heart has not turned to stone. You feel everything, perhaps too much, with a rawness that has never fully scarred over. When you see suffering in others, you ache with recognition. When someone you love is in pain, you want desperately to help them. But when the pain is your own, when the tears are yours, something ancient and automatic takes over. A door slams shut inside your chest. The drawbridge rises. The fortress seals itself against the very comfort you would freely give to anyone else. This is not strength choosing isolation. This is a nervous system that learned in its most vulnerable developmental moments that crying into the void is more bearable than crying towards someone who will not come. It is a heart that was broken not by betrayal, but by absence, not by harm, but by the empty space where safety should have been. And the cruelest part is that this kind of wound does not announce itself. There are no bruises to point to, no harsh words to quote, no clear villain in the story. How do you mourn what was never there? How do you remember the embraces you never received, the soothing words never spoken, the hand that never reached through the darkness to find you? You cannot. And so the wound remains invisible even to yourself. You only feel it as a strange hollowness, a cold spot in the center of your chest that never quite warms. You feel it in the way your body stiffens when someone moves to hug you, in the way you cannot quite believe that anyone would want to sit with you in your sadness without agenda or timer ticking. You feel it in your compulsive need to handle everything yourself, to be useful and capable, and never ever vulnerable in a way that might require someone else to show up for you. This need to be comforted, to be held when you are breaking, to have someone else's calm nervous system steady your own when panic floods through you. This is not weakness. It is not childishness that you should have outgrown. It is human biology. It is the way our species was designed to survive, and you were denied it at the exact moment your developing brain needed it most. To understand what happened to you, we must travel backward into biology, into the design of the human nervous system, and the way an infant brain constructs its relationship with safety. A newborn enters the world with a nervous system that is fundamentally incomplete. It cannot regulate its own emotional states. It cannot soothe its own terror. When distress floods through a baby's body, when cortisol spikes and the heart races and the entire system screams danger, that infant has no internal mechanism to restore calm. It is not capable of self-regulation. It can only signal through crying that it needs someone else's nervous system to borrow. This is called co-regulation. It is the biological bridge between two nervous systems, the way a parent's calm heartbeat and steady breathing and gentle voice act as an external regulator for the infant's chaos. When a mother picks up her crying child, something profound occurs beneath the level of conscious awareness. Her parasympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for rest and safety, communicates directly with her child's activated sympathetic nervous system, the branch responsible for fight and flight. Her body teaches the infant's body how to return to baseline, how to move from panic back to peace. The rhythm of her breathing entrains the child's breathing. The warmth of her skin triggers the release of oxytocin. The sound of her voice, pitched in that universal soothing tone that transcends language, activates the ventral vagal pathway, the neural highway that connects social engagement to feelings of safety. This is not optional. This is not a luxury or a matter of parenting philosophy. This is neurodevelopmental architecture. The infant brain is literally constructing its capacity for emotional regulation through these thousands of repeated experiences of distress, answered by comfort of panic, met with presence. Each time a caregiver responds to crying with soothing, the infant's brain strengthens the neural pathways that will eventually allow for self-regulation. The message encoded is simple and essential when you are overwhelmed. Safety is possible, help is available, you are not alone in your suffering. But when the crying goes unanswered, when the child is left to metabolize terror alone, a different kind of learning occurs. The infant's cortisol levels remain elevated for extended periods. The stress response, which is meant to be acute and temporary, becomes chronic. The developing brain, flooded with stress hormones and unable to find relief, makes an adaptation that is both brilliant and devastating. It shuts down. The technical term is dissociation, but the felt experience is simpler. The child disappears from their own body, unplugs from the overwhelming sensations, goes somewhere else inside themselves, where the pain is distant and manageable. The crying stops. And to an outside observer, to a parent who believes in the philosophy of letting children cry it out to teach them independence, this silence looks like success. The child has learned to self-soothe, they say. But this is not self-soothing. This is learned helplessness. This is a nervous system that has concluded at the most fundamental pre-verbal level that signaling for help is useless, that connection in moments of distress is unavailable, that survival depends on shutting down the need itself. The child in the dark room stops crying not because the need for comfort has been met, but because the need has been severed from any expectation of response. The neural pathways being strengthened are not the ones that lead to healthy emotional regulation. They are the ones that lead to isolation, to emotional numbing, to a profound distrust of relationships as a source of soothing. The message encoded is different now. Your feelings are too much. Your needs are a burden you must handle your pain alone because no one is coming. And so the child learns to self-soothe in whatever ways are available. Some rock themselves a rhythmic motion that mimics the sensation of being held. Some suck their thumbs long past the age when it is socially acceptable, because the oral stimulation triggers the parasympathetic nervous system and creates a shadow of calm. Some pull their own hair or scratch their own skin because physical pain is more concrete than emotional pain and therefore easier to manage. some clutch stuffed animals, until the fabric wears through, pouring into these objects all the need for comfort that has nowhere else to go. These adaptations follow them into adulthood, transformed but still recognizable. The man who achieved everything his parents never did, who built a career that glitters with success, who comes home each evening to an empty apartment and drinks whiskey alone until the knot in his chest loosens. He does not call anyone when the darkness arrives. He has learned that his emotional pain is his own problem to solve. The alcohol does what a nervous system was supposed to do. It calms the firing neurons. It quiets the screaming inside his head. It lets him sleep. It is maladaptive, self-soothing, a substitute for the co-regulation he never received, and it will slowly destroy him while he mistakes it for strength. Or the woman who laughs constantly, whose brightness fills every room, who collects shopping bags like some people collect air. The packages arrive daily, each one a small hit of dopamine, each purchase a temporary sensation of being filled. She does not understand why she cannot stop. She only knows that the moment between ordering something and receiving it creates a feeling she cannot name, something like anticipation, something like hope, something that resembles the feeling a child has waiting for a parent to come home. The objects themselves do not matter. They pile up in closets, tags still attached. What matters is the ritual of seeking, of filling the empty space, of trying to give herself the sensation of being cared for through the only language available: acquisition. These are not moral failings. These are not character flaws. These are the adaptive strategies of a nervous system that was forced to develop in isolation, that had to construct its own methods of returning to baseline, because the biological design, the design that requires another person's presence and touch and attunement, was unavailable. The tragedy is that these strategies work partially, temporarily enough to keep a person functional, but never enough to truly heal the underlying wound. You can drink yourself calm, shop yourself full, work yourself numb, but you cannot regulate a nervous system that was built for connection through isolation alone. And beneath all of these adaptations lies something even more fundamental: skin hunger, the absence of touch. Human beings require physical contact the way they require food and water. Infants who are fed and changed but never held develop failure to thrive. Their bodies, despite receiving adequate nutrition, begin to shut down. Adults who are deprived of touch experience increased cortisol, decreased immune function, higher rates of depression and anxiety. Touch is not optional. It is biological necessity. The skin is the largest organ in the body, dense with nerve endings, specifically designed to receive and interpret the meaning of contact. A hand on your back, a head on your shoulder, an arm around your waist, these transmit information that goes straight to the deepest parts of the brain, bypassing language entirely, saying simply, "You are not alone, you are safe, you belong to someone." But when you were young and you needed this most desperately, when your skin was hungry and your body was screaming for contact, there was no one to answer. And so you learned to live with the hunger. You learned to ignore the signals your body was sending. You learned that touch is awkward and unnecessary, and sometimes even frightening in its intensity. When someone hugs you now, your system does not know how to receive it. You feel overwhelmed, almost claustrophobic. Your muscles go rigid. You pat them quickly on the back and pull away, creating distance as fast as socially acceptable, not because you do not want the hug, but because your nervous system has been wired to interpret closeness as threat rather than safety, because vulnerability in the presence of another person triggers the ancient memory of reaching out and finding no one there. This is the cruel paradox. You are starving for the very thing you cannot let yourself receive. You are a person dying of thirst who flinches away from water. Your body needs touch, needs comfort, needs the presence of another calm nervous system to help regulate your own. But your defenses, built so carefully over so many years, will not allow it in. You have become the hedgehog in the cold, desperate for warmth but covered in quills, unable to get close without pain to yourself or to others. And the loneliest part is that you have learned to hide all of this so well that even the people who love you do not see it. They see your competence. They see your independence. They do not see the child still sitting in the dark, still waiting, still hungry for a comfort that never learned how to arrive. But there is another truth that must be spoken here, one that does not erase the wound but adds dimension to it. You survived. In the absence of comfort, in the void where soothing should have lived, you built something remarkable. You became the person who could sit with their own pain and not disintegrate. You learned to walk through fire without anyone holding your hand. You developed a capacity for solitude that most people will never possess, a kind of existential endurance that allows you to face the darkest parts of being human without needing someone else to light the way for you. This is not nothing. This is not a consolation prize. While others panic when left alone with their thoughts, when the distractions fade and the silence becomes too loud, you have already made peace with that territory. You know its landscape. You have walked its paths 1,000 times. When crisis arrives, when the world tilts and others scramble for someone to tell them what to do, you are already in motion. You assess, you adapt, you handle what needs handling. Not because you are unafraid, but because you learned long ago that fear is just another sensation to be endured, that panic is just another storm to wait out, that no one is coming to rescue you, so you might as well rescue yourself. There is a particular kind of freedom in this. You do not need permission to act. You do not need validation to trust your own judgment. You do not collapse when disappointment arrives because you have never constructed your stability on the foundation of someone else's presence. You are the ground beneath your own feet. You are your own shelter in the storm. And while this was born from necessity rather than choice, while you would not have chosen this path if another had been available, the strength itself is real. The self-reliance is genuine. You have become someone who can be trusted to show up for yourself, even when no one else does. And perhaps there is something else worth seeing, something that requires turning around and looking back at the people who failed to comfort you with different eyes. Your parents, whoever raised you, whoever was supposed to respond when you cried in the dark, they carried their own history into the room with them. They were not blank slates who chose cruelty. They were people shaped by their own childhoods, their own unanswered cries, their own dark rooms where no one came. It is likely, perhaps even certain, that they too were children who learned that emotions are private, that pain is meant to be endured alone, that reaching out is useless or weak or dangerous. They could not give you what they never received. They could not teach you emotional language they were never taught. When you cried, perhaps they stood on the other side of the door, uncertain, afraid of doing it wrong, paralyzed by their own lack of a template for comfort. Or perhaps they believed, truly believed, that they were making you stronger, that letting you cry it out was a gift of independence, that soothing you would make you soft and unprepared for a world they knew to be harsh. They gave you what they had: food, shelter, maybe even a kind of love that expressed itself through provision rather than presence. But they could not give you attunement, could not mirror your emotions back to you in a way that made them feel manageable, because they themselves had never been seen. This understanding does not require immediate forgiveness. You do not have to absolve them of the ways their absence shaped you. You do not have to pretend the wound is not real, simply because they did not intend to inflict it. But seeing their limitations, understanding that they were operating from their own deprivation, can free you from a particular kind of suffering. It can release you from the story that says you were unworthy of comfort, that something about you specifically made you unlovable, or too much, or fundamentally wrong. It was not about you. It was never about you. It was about their capacity, their wounds, their own empty wells from which they could not pour. You were a child who needed holding, and you were born to people who did not know how to hold. This is tragedy, not judgment. This is generational transmission of pain, not personal failure. And understanding this does not change what happened, but it can change what it means. You were not rejected. You were simply waiting for something your caregivers had never learned to provide. The need was legitimate. The response was inadequate. And now, as an adult, you have the power to begin meeting that need in ways that were not possible then. The path toward healing does not begin with other people. It cannot. Your nervous system is too wary, your defenses too well constructed, your body too practiced in the art of stiffening against touch. To ask you to simply open yourself to comfort after a lifetime of living without it is like asking someone who has never seen sunlight to stare directly into the sun. It would be blinding. It would be overwhelming. It would send you running back into the familiar darkness, where at least you know how to navigate. So the beginning is gentler than that. It starts with your own hands, your own body, your own capacity to provide the physical sensations of being held without requiring vulnerability in the presence of another person. There is something called a weighted blanket, 15 or 20 pounds of evenly distributed pressure that settles over your body like an embrace. It mimics the sensation of being held, triggers the same release of oxytocin, the same calming of the nervous system that occurs when someone wraps their arms around you. But it asks nothing of you. It does not require you to make eye contact or accept your own need or trust that the person holding you will not let go. It is simply weight, simply pressure, simply the physical reminder that your body has boundaries and something is attending to them. Warm water works in a similar way. When you sink into a bath, when the heat surrounds you and holds you, suspended, your nervous system receives information it has been hungry for. You are contained. You are supported. The water touches every part of you at once, a full-body experience of being held that bypasses the complications of human contact. Your muscles release tension they have been carrying for so long you forgot it was there. Your breathing deepens. For a few minutes you remember what it feels like to be soothed by something outside yourself, to let your guard down in the presence of sensation that asks nothing in return. And then there is the butterfly hug, a technique so simple it seems impossible that it could matter. You cross your arms over your chest, each hand resting on the opposite shoulder, and you tap gently, alternating left and right, a rhythm like a heartbeat or the wings of something trying to take flight. This is not metaphor. This is bilateral stimulation, a method used in trauma therapy to help the nervous system process what it could not process alone. The tapping mimics the sensation of being patted, being soothed, being told through touch that you are safe, but you are doing it for yourself. You are becoming in this moment the parent you needed, the presence that was absent, the hands that should have reached for you in the dark. These practices are not substitutes for human connection. They are training wheels. They are teaching your body that soothing is possible, that calm can be achieved, that you do not have to white-knuckle your way through every moment of distress. And as your nervous system begins to remember what regulation feels like, as it starts to trust that panic does not have to last forever, something else becomes possible. You can begin to let other people in, not all at once, not with everyone, but in small, careful doses, with someone you choose. This requires a new kind of language, one you were never taught. You have spent your life waiting for people to notice your pain, without you having to name it, to read your silence as the cry for help it actually is. To understand that when you say you are fine, you are actually drowning. But people are not mind readers. They see your competence and believe it. They see your independence and respect it. They do not know that beneath the surface, you are waiting, still waiting for someone to push past your defenses and insist on caring for you. This is not their failure. This is the gap between your need and your ability to express it, so you must learn to speak it plainly. To say with your voice, with actual words, I am struggling right now and I need you to sit with me. Or, I am sad and I need to be held without having to explain why. Or, I cannot carry this alone anymore and I need you to help me. These sentences will feel impossible at first. They will catch in your throat like glass. Your entire system will resist, will tell you that asking is weak, that needing is shameful, that the only acceptable way to move through the world is self-sufficiently. But this is the old programming, the voice of the child who learned that signaling brings nothing but more disappointment. You are not that child anymore. You are someone who can choose deliberately and consciously to take the risk of reaching out. And you do not have to reach toward everyone. You can choose one person, someone whose presence feels steady, whose response to your pain has been consistent, who has demonstrated through action that they will not punish you for being human. Maybe it is a friend who has known you long enough to see through your armor. Maybe it is a partner who has been waiting patiently for permission to comfort you. Maybe for now it is an animal, a dog or cat, whose love is uncomplicated and whose desire for physical contact is uncomplicated, and who will curl against you without needing explanations or emotional labor in return. Animals are often the safest first step for people like you because they offer touch without judgment, presence without expectation, warmth without the vulnerability that human relationships require. And then when you are ready, when your nervous system has practiced enough that it no longer interprets comfort as threat, you can try something more difficult. You can close your eyes and return in your imagination to that dark room where the child version of you still sits alone. You can see them there, small and frightened and convinced that this is simply how the world works. And you can walk into that room, the adult version of yourself, the one who survived, the one who learned to be strong precisely because no one came. You can sit down beside that child and you can say the words they needed to hear, then the words you need to hear now. You do not tell them to stop crying. You do not tell them to be strong. You say, I am here, now. You can cry as long as you need to. I am not leaving. I will stay. There is a particular way you have learned to stand in the rain. You do not run for cover. You do not lift your hand to shield your face. You simply stand there, water soaking through your clothes, pooling in your shoes, dripping from your hair, and you tell yourself this is fine, this is normal, this is what rain does and what bodies endure. When someone approaches with an umbrella, when they try to angle it over your head to offer shelter, you step away. You say you do not mind the rain. You say you are already wet anyway. You say you prefer it this way, the honesty of being soaked, the clarity of not pretending the storm is not happening. But you have been standing in the rain so long that you have forgotten what it feels like to be dry. You have normalized the cold, the weight of waterlogged fabric, the way your fingers prune and your lips turn blue. You have mistaken endurance for preference, survival for choice. And the truth that is hard to speak and harder to accept is that you deserve the umbrella. You deserve to be dry. You deserve someone standing close enough that their warmth reaches you, that the rain no longer touches your skin, that for a few moments you can remember what shelter feels like. Your independence is real. Your strength is earned. The fortress you built around your heart kept you alive when you had no other option. But a fortress is not a home, and the walls that protected you when you were small and alone are now the walls that keep out the very comfort you have been starving for all along. There is no weakness in lowering the drawbridge. There is no failure in letting someone stand beside you in the storm. Your hands were designed to reach for other hands to hold, and be held to give and receive touch as the most fundamental language of belonging. The child in the dark room grew up. They learned to survive without comfort because survival was the only option available. But survival is not the same as living. And you now, in this moment, with all the strength you have earned and all the years you have endured, you have a choice that child never had. You can open the door. You can turn on the light. You can let someone in. Not because you need rescue, but because you deserve companionship. Not because you cannot stand alone, but because you no longer have to. You have carried yourself this far. Now let someone help carry you the rest of the way.